All right, now that we have understood how to think of metrics and design the right kind of metrics for your system, let's talk a bit about the implementation part of it, right? Now, there's three ways that you could implement these metrics, and the three ways are: one is human evaluation, right? Once you come up with a bunch of metrics, you can have people assess it. Let's say you have helpfulness and you have rubrics associated with helpfulness. You can ask people in your team to grade, right? And kind of say that for this conversation, was it helpful? Was it not helpful? And they have a bunch of rubrics to look at to make that decision. The second way is to have code-based metrics, right? And code-based metrics are essentially deterministic checks, and they can be used only for some kinds of metrics that are more deterministic in nature. For instance, if you have something like, was a valid JSON created at the end of this, you can use a Python code to identify if a valid JSON was used. Was a valid zip code generated as the output? You can also use deterministic checks or code-based checks to do that. So generally for objective kind of metrics that you can code up and you don't need any semantic understanding, you can use code-based metrics. And then the third most popular type, which gained a lot of momentum in the AI era, is LLM judges, which is have an LLM judge decide if a particular metric did well or not. And the way you do it is prompt the LLM judge and give it enough context in order to make that decision, right? Human evaluation tends to be the slowest but most high quality. Code-based metrics are cheaper, they're faster, but then they are not capable enough, because if you have subjective meanings of what good looks like, it's very hard to implement that with code. LLM judges seem to be kind of best of both worlds, which is they are much more, they're much more faster than humans, but they're also much capable than code-based metrics. And let's see where each of these make more sense. Remember that if you start building AI products and then you have these reference data set, human evaluation is the first thing that you want to do, because humans can tell you what the gold standard looks like, right? You can build data sets, you can put your systems into production, and you can have humans kind of say, oh, this looks good, this doesn't look good, which means that we have to improve on a particular piece and stuff like that. And they come with nuanced judgment, with the domain expertise, with flexibility, because they understand that this is an edge case and stuff. And also they are the source of truth for us, right? But the problem with doing this when you're building an AI product and doing it continuously, especially remember that when you go into production, you're probably seeing thousands or hundreds of thousands of inputs every day. So you can't really have humans keep annotating how these metrics are performing. It's very slow and expensive, right? Which is why human evaluation should be used very carefully, and it should be used to guide the decision of your other evaluation methods and not be used constantly all through your evaluation process, right? Code-based metrics are quick. They make sense when rules work. Some cases where you can use code-based metrics, like I mentioned, is for structure validation, whether all the required fields are available, whether JSON format is met, etc. Content detection, right? Sometimes there are specific words that you don't want to be used in your system. Just to check if those words are being used or some phrases are being used, you could use code-based or keyword-based matches in order to do it. And also a lot of performance metrics can be implemented using code-based metrics. For instance, response time, the number of words or tokens that your model is emitting, your product, which is built on top of your model, is emitting, and stuff like that, right? These kind of easy metrics that are objective but are still important to the success of your AI product can be implemented by code-based metric. LLM judges are essentially a way to automate human-like evaluation, right? Whenever you have subjective metrics, especially the ones like we spoke about, which is helpfulness or like escalating accuracy and things like that, ideally, you want a human to go through these conversations and label them and tell you that these are the issues with our system. But you can't do that all the time because it's not scalable in nature. And that's where LLM judges are far more useful, because they can be prompted in order to function like humans. And in order to prompt them, or in order to give them the right kind of context, you need to have defined very clear rubrics. And remember that when we spoke about building a reference data set itself, we talked about building the right kind of rubrics. So that kind of flows even into the LLM judge scenario. So if you have something like escalation accuracy as one of your metric, you should have very specific examples of what acceptable means, what not acceptable means, etc. For instance, acceptable means it identifies the retention situations, it escalates billing disputes over 100, etc. Like I told you, In order to build metrics and rubrics, sometimes there is pages and pages of information of these rubrics itself that has to be defined very well so that your LLM judge can work well. I won't go too deep into calibrating LLM judges so that they can be accurate and can reflect the quality of your AI systems, because that might just be a course on its own. There's quite a lot of data science knowledge that is required in order to calibrate a LLM judge. And this is an Evals 101 course, so we don't want to go that far. And also, depending on the kind of use case, whether you have RAG or you have agentic systems, you have tool calling systems, the kind of metrics you should be using also become very different. We won't go too deep into that, so not to overwhelm you. But I'll leave with a note on LLM judges, which is calibration is incredibly important for LLM judges. People think that I can just write a rubric and I can define what the judge has to do and it will magically help me catch errors. That couldn't be far from the truth, because just because you write a particular set of criteria, your LLM is also just another model, right? It cannot be accurately reflecting everything that humans do. So there is a very systematic process for calibration. I will attach a few resources which helps you understand what that process is. And without calibration, your LLM judges can add more problems than help your system. And the calibration process at a very high level generally involves having humans evaluate using your rubrics, running your LLM judges on those human evaluations and checking how calibrated it is, and kind of iterating and improving the LLM judge to get closer to human-like evaluation. So building an LLM judge is as good as building a mini AI product on its own, because you want to make sure that your LLM judge is not adding its own bias. So that's the little note. So depending on what your parameters are and what stage of AI product development you're in, and what kind of metric that you're looking to implement, you can choose human evaluation, code-based metrics, or LLM judges. With most teams, generally you start off with human evaluation when the size of your data is small, but slowly you try to implement LLM judges so that they can scale your evaluation system, but you do that thoughtfully as well, right? And this is a nice table which shows you how each of them score based on scalability, cost, speed, nuance, and subjectivity. And you can just have this handy when you're building these systems. But you don't need this table at this point, right? Because we've gone through what each of them are capable of doing. So it should be much more straightforward to think of it that way. Okay, the key takeaways from chapter 5 are this, which is, if possible, if you don't have to be using LLM judges, don't use them. Don't think that writing a prompt is basically the way to evaluate. That isn't. LLM judges must be carefully calibrated. If there's a way to objectively evaluate something, please build deterministic or objective evals. There are a lot of cases where you cannot objectively evaluate. You want to be looking at subjective metrics. In that case, you want to be thinking about human evaluators as well as LLM judges, but you always want to make sure that your LLM judges are as close as possible to human evaluators, right? All right, we spoke a bit about how to implement these evaluation metrics. We'll also have a component at the end, which tells you how to implement simple metrics using Arize, which is an observability tool. But just remember that these are the 3 ways that you could be implementing, right? Now that we have learned how to build a reference data set, how to think about metrics and design them, how to implement these metrics, we'll go to the next part, which is, let's say you have all of this figured out and you put your system into production. What do you do now? What kind of information should your metrics tell you? And how do you continuously improve your system, right? That's where the real deal is. So that we'll start talking about production starting from the next chapter.